Okay, so it was actually some newer growth growing underneath the old Domatia. So check underneath and see if it's actually growing covertly for you. There's a chance.
Okay, so today we are talking all about rescuing your Hoyas that are in distress.
Yeah.
Well,
what are you trying to do?
Trying to raise it up a little bit.
Oh.
Okay, so if you have specific questions you want Caleb to answer, make sure you put those in the comments. But we figure we would just kind of talk generally. We don't, unfortunately, fortunately, have a really good example of this for because we try really hard not to let our plants die if we can avoid it. It sometimes happens.
Yeah, I searched for a plant to show a plant on the brink. I do have a couple, I guess I could bring out, but it doesn't really serve as a good demonstration. It's hard to see what's going on. And honestly, the point that I wanted to make that it doesn't really require showing is that sometimes doing the right thing for your plant is spilling it out and seeing what's going on in there. And sometimes you find something that's obvious and sometimes you don't, but repotting it can help put it on track to recovery.
Let's talk about what are signs that your plant is in distress.
Definitely thinning of leaves that don't rebound when you water. If you're seeing your leaves thin out and it's watering day and you water them and then they come back, that's okay. That's part of a healthy cycle. If you're seeing more than that, there may be a reason to see why that plant isn't uptaking the water that you're feeding it, that you're watering it with. So that's definitely a consideration that you might want to evaluate, because having a plant that is dehydrating means that it's on a cycle that it can't stay on forever. Eventually that plant will succumb if it doesn't find a way to rehydrate itself. So that the plant wants to be in a state of hydration and wants to have full leaves. And if it has the opportunity, osmosis will allow for that to happen. The plant will pull the moisture from the roots and it will drag it along in a system similar to a siphon. It pulls the nutrients up into the leaves and into the plant and transpires and evaporates off of the leaf so that cycle can continue. If you are in a very humid environment, do we need to adjust?
It's very bouncy there.
If we are in a very humid environment, then we have to evaluate those circumstances differently.
So it's usually a sign of something going on. If your leaves aren't hydrating, then you got to be worried that their roots aren't taking up water in some way. Other things that we were watching for to show signs of distress: sudden stops in growth. If suddenly a plant that was growing well isn't growing at all. Sudden changes in color that don't look healthy or sun related. If there's something suddenly green or yellow, then we're going to start to check and see why is that exactly. Sorry, Caleb's messing with the other camera over here. Come off? Oh, I didn't realize. Anyway, sorry, this is quite funny to watch behind the camera. We're still figuring out this whole do streaming situation. Good morning, everybody over there in that land.
Is that doing anything?
Oh, thank you. Caleb loves the Santa Cruz hat as well. It's kind of his calling card. Can you turn this a little bit?
You know what's crazy is I've tried to replace it.
Yeah.
And I can't.
I can't find it again.
Yeah. The large hand is the one that you can't find. So it's like vintage, sadly, because I have searched.
Yeah. Okay. So when you have a plant that looks like it's in distress, first thing to do is investigate, right? Yeah. We need to go on a hunt to see what's going on. We want to check the whole plant. So we want to check the aerials. Do we see any signs of pests? Is there damage on the back of the leaves? Do we have any very knobby growth on the growth points of the plant? Often that's a sign that you're getting some mite infestation.
Yes.
Oh, wow. And then also we're looking for what's going on in the roots. Does this soil look impacted? Are we getting dry spots in the soil? That's something that we frequently see people have to deal with, is that if they don't break up that soil or aerate it well, occasionally you get these pockets in your pot which are very dry, are hydrophobic and won't take up water, and that leads to dying back of some roots, and that will not support certain parts of growth.
Yeah, especially if you're in a rigid cup. Like our clear cups are easily, you can just pinch on the sides and aerate the soil. But a terracotta or a harder plastic cup that you're growing in doesn't give the ability to break that soil up by just a simple squeezing of the soil. So you do have to get in there sometimes with a chopstick and just give a little gentle stir. You don't want to destroy your roots, but you do want to loosen up that any soil that might be in the center of the plant and break that up so water can flow through there evenly throughout the whole pot.
So if you have a plant that you see suddenly in distress that looks like it's got thinning leaves or something, where is the line between I'll save this plant and I won't? How would you intervene there?
First things first, I would spill the plant out and check on its root system. If the roots appear to be healthy, meaning that the casing isn't pulling off of the inner fiber of the root, so it's a healthy growing root that's a good color, it's white or yellow or orange. Sometimes they vary in color slightly, but you can feel that it's healthy and vital. It's not wilting and falling apart under your fingers. It's not like, oftentimes you'll see a root that looks okay, but the casing will pull right off, the outer sleeve or bark off the roots will pull right off. And then just the inner filament of the root is there. That is a dead root. That has been damaged and emaciated or eaten by something or whatever. That's the kind of stuff that's the kind of damage that we're looking for to see that those are not healthy roots. If there's any of that there, I'll trim that away and evaluate what's left of the healthy roots. Because often you have multiple situations going on. It's not always that all your roots are dead. Sometimes some are dead and some are trying to regrow in the process. So if you can evaluate how much root is left, and if there's more plant than can be supported by that root, that's when I'll start getting into taking some insurance cuttings, or just to cut back on the cutting if I'm rerooting something that doesn't have enough to sustain.
And a good rule of thumb is that you need as much root as aerial plant to support that plant. Just like a tree outside, you want to make sure if you have only 1 or 2 roots, you don't want to have 13 vines.
Yes. Yeah, a couple of small roots. You really want to support one node of growth. And when that plant is sustained and supported by the root system, it will grow on and push a vine and more leaves. But you want to start small. That's a big point of suggestion. Is a lot of times you get a plant, you find out that the roots are not in great shape, but the plant is too big to restart on its own. So what you have to do is cut that back. Whether you're trying to take cuttings or need cuttings or not, you are in a way taking insurance cuttings, because you're cutting the plant that you're trying to root back to a more manageable size. That small root zone will only sustain so much growth. So you're cutting it back to the point where that can start fresh at a good place. If you start growing a healthy plant with very small roots, put it in a pot, you will continue to watch that plant emaciate before your eyes, and the root system will not be enough to support it. And it may or may not continue to survive that bottom node of the plant, but the rest of the plant could die back on you. So in essence, you're not actually saving that plant. You're just watching it deteriorate more slowly right in front of your eyes. So my opinion, my advice would be to go ahead and cut that back, take those insurance cuttings, put them into your propagation method, whatever that is, and also then give your rooting plant a better chance to get established and take off and do its thing. So
what do you do if you investigate and you find out that it is looking like there is a pest situation?
Okay. That's another common situation that you find, whether they're plants that you're bringing into your collection or they're plants that have been in your collection. Often you will find that there have been pest pressures you weren't aware of, that suddenly by digging it out of the pot, you realize that there are some issues that you're struggling with. Soil mites or mealybugs, they're not always evident on the top of the plant, but if a plant is stalled out and doesn't seem to be moving, then you find out that this is what's the cause of it. I'll remove all the soil material that I can, make sure that I see the visible roots and make sure that there are some visible roots to work with. And then I would treat that with either the Bifin AT or abamectin Azamax, some sort of pesticide in order to spray directly on the roots to whatever's on there normally wouldn't be sprayed because it would be covered by soil. So now you're exposing them to a different level of combatant, and hopefully that can push them back and help. So mealies in the soil are not treated when you spray the areoles of your plant.
I hope your day is quiet.
However, when you dig up the roots and spray them directly, you're going to have a lot better result with that.
Michigan State actually recommends cutting dipping or plant dipping entirely in pesticide. Obviously, you have to use protection. You need to know what you're doing there. But that's a good, if you want to try to save the plant.
Yeah. Right?
Chill. All right. I hope it's chill.
The list is Bifin is really great for insects. Abamectin is really good for mites. Azamax is really good for kids and pets. If you have kids and pets in your home,
don't spray it on that.
Don't spray abamectin or Bifin in your house. We are growing in a commercial grow space in our garage, so we use those more caustic chemicals that we are able to put out in a way that is safe for everyone. We close off the space and let everything dry, and then things are handled afterwards. So we have a procedure that makes it safe for us to handle those chemicals. And that's why I suggest using the Azamax in your homes, because it is pet and safe friendly. It's not dangerous to the people that are around. You do have to use it a little bit more consistently, a little more persistently to manage your pest issues. However, it is effective and it is safe.
And Mayo, if you go to our website, schleeftropicals.com, there is a Hoya handouts section, and we have one on pests and treating for pests, and all of those chemicals are listed there as well too.
Yeah. If you feel you need to use a stronger solution, like abamectin or Bifin, there are ways that you can implement that. Reach out to us if you're looking for suggestions, but sometimes you can close it in a infrequently used bathroom shower stall or something like that. You can set up a drainage for your plants and just spray them down in there and take them in a small handful at a time and put them in a tote or somehow contain them and spray them down. There are ways to do it in your home, but cutting down exposure is important, and being aware of the chemicals that you're using and what dangers you're facing is something we advocate for. Know what you're dealing with.
So if you got a pest pressure, treat for pests, right? Sometimes we decide that the plant isn't worth treating, right? Yeah. Sometimes we have a plant that's inexpensive. We have multiples of, isn't one we particularly like growing in the first place. And we just cut our losses and say, okay, you're done. You don't grow here anymore. Yeah. You're not worth the risk of this spreading or the time and attention it's going to take to treat you, because treatment for pests requires weeks of dedication. You have to be on a schedule. You have to be diligent about repeating your processes, as a manufacturer says, if you really want success and you don't want them to just come back. A lot of people see the pests die off after one treatment and they're like, oh, I did it. Magic. Yeah. But then they're shocked when they come back 12 weeks later. It's like, no, you didn't. You just let them
You pushed them back a little. But you didn't win the fight yet.
Yeah. So. But there are other things too that you can start to investigate if it's not pests. Say you dump it out and there are no pest pressures there. Oh no. Yeah, that can be a struggle too. I think when you have one node, it's hard because you would assume not very heavily rooted yet with only one node. They just don't have enough plant underneath the soil to really withstand loss for very long.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of those.
Yeah.
A lot of those hopefuls. When you're like, oh, I bought it. It was cheap. It was a good specimen I collected, but it wasn't quite up to the standard and didn't survive
to ship a plant.
Yeah.
And when it only has a little bit of root, it causes strain on that plant. It has to recover from that first in your home. It has to adjust to your conditions, and it has to push out new growth all at the same time. And that's challenging for a plant to do.
Yeah.
Without, and that's assuming you do everything right and don't have a bad day where you forget or, it's always very young. So again, do we do that sometimes? Sure. We buy plants that are only one node.
Sure.
If I want to get my hands on the species or it's a good enough deal, I'm going to try it. But I do realize that. Buy them rooted.
Yeah.
Honestly, it sounds terrible, but if you can wait until they have new growth, that's why we are such an advocate of that. We will not send you a plant until it's pushed out new growth, and not just a little bit, enough that we know it's growing well before it comes. It goes in the mail, because it's just a lot less likely to get stressed out by that shipping period.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell. Some of these plants you're seeing, they look great when you pull them out of the tote and hold them up to the camera. But when they spend an hour or two out of the tote, they start withering because they don't have thick cuticles. They're not hardened off for ambient humidity. That becomes a real problem when you're shipping those plants across the country and they have 5 days without humidity. Then you receive it, right? You got that plant in the mail and you didn't know. No one told you this is a tote plant. No one told you this is struggling because it's lack of humidity that it's recently experiencing.
There's
and
nothing
it's not
wrong
part
with
of
selling
its
that
normal
way.
routine. But that's the difficulty, is you don't know what you're up against sometimes. Sometimes there is no pest pressure, but the plant's tanking so hard and you don't actually have time to realize that it's a tote plant and needs high humidity.
Knowing what you're buying. So ask the seller, how have you been growing this plant? What has it needed in your care, so that you can help be ready for it when it arrives. If this is a plant that they've grown in a higher humidity situation, you want to have a high humidity situation set up for it. You can acclimate it back out of that. If that's not how you grow your Hoyas, you may need to decide to grow it outside that and give it less and less humidity over a few weeks to get it into your normal environment. But you should be isolating it anyway, so that's not too hard to do. I think a big thing that people don't consider is the amount of light a plant was getting in the grower space versus your space. Most of the community who are buying are home growers growing under LED lights or just window lighting. And most of the sellers, not all, but most, are growing under either commercial lighting or outdoor light. And that's a big difference for a plant to go from a sunny greenhouse in Florida to a dark box to your low light home, and then expect it to support itself in the same way. So knowing that, you know, that plant is either going to need different lighting or a different watering schedule than you are used to. And again, that's another thing that you can slowly acclimate the plant to your normal schedule. But I think whether or not I think a lot of people, and I don't want to void anybody's seller guarantee, because a lot of sellers are going to tell you when you receive this plant, don't unpot it, don't repot it for, you know, X period of days. That's not what we do here. We will always unpot a plant that we receive the instant we receive it.
We know that we are avoiding any warranty with the seller. We realize that is the case. However, I would rather know what's there, and I'm more equipped to deal with that knowing what's there than guessing what's there.
We want to know how many roots are there, and we want to know what the soil is like all the way through the pot. You've heard us say it before, but you always water for the size of your roots, not for the size of your pot, not for the size of your soil. If you have roots that are only this long, and you have a 3-inch cup and you soak that whole soil, it will never dry. Your plant's never going to take up that much water. It doesn't have enough roots or enough leaf to use it. So it's just going to slowly rot. So I think knowing that you only have this much root, you give it 2 tablespoons of water, and then it's a lot happier than a 3-inch cup of water soaking wet.
In other cases, sometimes you have plants that are potted up in coconut chunks and then repotted in something else. And so you have inconsistent material there. You need to know that. You need to be aware of how these roots are situated so that you can appropriately water them. Usually that outer layer is not well rooted and the inner layer is. And if you have coconut chunks in there, they're very porous and allow for water to flow very quickly through. But you might not be reaching the other side of the pot, and only half your pot might be getting moistened by the watering. So it's just something to be aware of, and it's something that you can work better with the circumstances once you know what they are.
Now we are, good morning, welcome, thanks for joining us. We're talking all about saving plants on the brink. So I hope you can find something useful here. Yes. Well, it depends on your soil, right? We grow our aeroids in a very chunky mix, but it's almost the exact same mix that we use for Hoyas, just a lot bigger pieces. Because the aeroids, their whole name, aeroid, tells you that they want to be in a soil that lets their water just fall through. They're used to growing on the sides of cliffs or in sides of trees where the water just goes down. Oh, sorry. Absolutely. Goes down when it rains heavy and falls right off. So our aeroids are all grown in big chunky pieces of bark, and they want to dry out. So they're going to go a little bit different. Our Hoyas, really, it depends on which Hoya and which environment it's in, but they maybe want a little more consistency in their watering. They can't always retain like the longer stretches that Depends on the Hoya. Yes, Ovavata certainly could, but
yeah.
So these are things to keep in mind. We're people who've grown a lot of plants in a lot of medias for a long time, so we are a little bit more willing to risk things that maybe other people aren't. So I don't care if I'm voiding the grower's guarantee, because I have good faith that I'm going to be able to try to save that plant either way.
Yeah.
And I'm not a person who generally will expect a seller to give me a guarantee on growth. Like, I expect them to ship me a plant safely. And if they've done that, once it arrives at my house, it's really on me. So that's why I'm okay with repotting everything right away. I want it in the soil that I understand, because I know how to water that. I have an anthurium queen coming in soon. Okay, so anthuriums, particularly velvety anthuriums like queen, they're tricky. They're not easy. I tried really hard to be an anthurium person.
Yeah.
Oh, fun. It's a good time. It's a fun hobby. We always tell people, like, CMD and us has noted that they're a new plant mom, just been there about a month.
Yeah.
It is a really fun hobby. It is a hobby where you're gonna spend time learning. You're gonna kill plants. That's okay.
Absolutely.
We always tell people, fall in love with the species, not the specimen. So if this one doesn't work, it may not be you. It might not be the right plant for you. That's okay. Just buy another one.
Right.
Part of the hobby is buying plants. So
and sometimes it's the third time's the charm. Sometimes you try one way and it doesn't work out, and the plant succumbs very quickly to your care, and then you try a different method and that works. And so it's all about trying again and not being too hard on yourself when you're not 100% successful at every single thing you try. By that, I mean, don't go out and buy the most expensive plants you can. Try your hand with some cheaper plants, because honestly, like, a lot of the care is very similar. Yeah. And once you have confidence with cheap plants, you can buy expensive plants and you can have a great time with it. But if you learn and experiment with expensive plants, you have a lot of hard lessons to learn, and
it can be disappointing.
Often they're even trickier to keep happy. And that's the difficult part, is you're new into the plant hobby. It's great and I love it. There's so many amazing, great plants that are affordable and easy to afford. Spend lots of time learning on those plants, because that information, that knowledge you're building there is transferable. However, learning that knowledge on expensive plants can get quite pricey.
And you've heard us say it before if you've been here, but we are big advocates of cutting up a plant that you care nothing about and growing it in different ways to experiment at home. So go to the store and buy a pothos or a pubic calyx, a basket of it, chop it into 20 pieces, and put it all over your house in different soil medias and different light, and see how it grows differently, because I think that teaches you a lot. Understanding the basic concepts of all of plant growth really is balancing light and water. And in doing that, you control your plant. Your plant shouldn't control you.
Yeah, you have to be careful not to get false confidence.
Yeah.
There are some tricky Hoyas out there.
Yeah.
Know that.
Rooted Leaves has said that you don't get too confident with just carnosas. She thought all Hoyas were easy, or they thought all Hoyas were easy because of them, and then got harder Hoyas. They can be. Yeah, there's definitely a range.
Yeah, and another great reason to have, like she was saying, a pothos around is if you have a difficult to root Hoya, you have it in a glass of water or something like that, propagation methods by water propagation, pothos release rooting hormone into the solution that they're rooting in. And so it's also a really great nudge for your difficult to root plants. If you want to try propagating them in water vials, stick a pothos leaf in there and let them root in there as well. And suddenly you have extra vital fluid there that grows roots at the ready. So it's another hot tip that if you don't know, plants help each other along the way. And if you have a pothos, they easily will take a haircut. A couple of nodes never heard of pothos in this world.
I think also for new growers, one thing that we really like to stress is understanding plant morphology and how that affects how your plant grows. Thicker, chunkier, succulent leaves hold water a lot longer than thin leaves. Thicker, chunkier roots hold water a lot longer than fine roots. So something like a begonia with very fine roots and very thin leaves isn't going to hold water as long and needs to be watered more frequently, or needs to be in a soil media that holds water longer.
Right. Something but not too long, because they're also very susceptible at those.
Yeah, you should look at multiflora you were showing me. That was pretty. Yeah. Multifloras, again, those are a terrestrial Hoya that has a green stem, so we know it's holding water in the stem, but has a very thin leaf, so we know it can't store much water in its leaves. So it needs to have the ability to take up water from the soil, transfer it through that stem and into the leaves very quickly. Okay, yeah, so you have some experience, and they're still learning about fertilizers and pest control, have some knowledge because bioactive terrariums because of reptiles. We have frogs, so it's different, right? Because you can't use some of the pests in there. Look at this multiflora Caleb was just showing me earlier.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah.
This is one we have not grown out to propagation yet. However, it's been giving us just green leaves for a while. Mm-hmm. And now it's finally coming around and giving us this really beautiful inner variegation. Yeah. Stunning. We've had the outer variegated for years, and it's been a great grower for us. But that inner variegated has been very tricky to get it to put out good color.
Interact This says, you talked about spraying your plants with a pesticide. I found that some of my Hoyas actually need to use a makeup brush to scrub them. Are you using like sulfur?
Yeah.
Most of the pesticides we use are aerial sprays or drenches for the pot.
Yeah, and most of them don't leave much of a residue. I will say that a heavy concentration of the bifin AT does have a slight milkiness to it, and it does leave some what I would consider water spots, medium to heavy water spots.
Okay.
Yeah, insecticidal soap. I have seen people use it, and it does work, but my point I would make about that is water will work as well. Mm-hmm. If you just rinse them off vigorously, that will help to knock back the population of mites. And if you did that on a regular basis, every day, say, on a plant, you could probably just rinse the mites away, and they wouldn't be able to affect your plant in a negative way if you just daily flushed the leaves. Now, can you get to your entire collection and do that? I think that's a very difficult expectation, and I think it may be unrealistic for most of us plant collectors that have a large collection with many, many species on it. And so that's where I would say the insecticidal soap, you have to really get contact with both sides of the leaf and the stem and the petiole. And that can be quite difficult to do over a large plant or over a large collection of plants. And that's why I would steer away from something like that. That would be more on a small collection, more manageable, but on a large collection like we have, it would be impossible.
It depends on where you're spraying to, right? We're spraying in a commercial space that we don't care if the pesticide gets everywhere, right? So I can take a good industrial sprayer that I know is going to provide a really good mist and cover the entire all sides of the plant very easily. There'll be spray on the shelves, there'll be spray everywhere, but I don't really care. In your house, it's different. Yeah. Cats are different, right? We do, like Caleb, when we used to grow calatheas, Caleb made me a Rubbermaid tote, like the big industrial totes. He drilled holes in it, drained holes in it, and he put suction cups on the bottom, and it perfectly spanned the tub so that I could suction it down to the sides of the tub, put my calatheas on it, spray everything, lift them up, spray the undersides, leave them there to drain, and then be done with it. And that was a really easy way to handle it inside the house. Now, we just used Azamax in the house. We didn't use stronger chemicals in the house. So that's something to keep in mind, is you're still putting it into the water system.
Yeah.
So, but it's a very convenient, cheap way to make yourself a little plant treatment area.
Yeah. And in that case, when your plants are dry, they're no longer a risk that your plants or your pets are going to be licking that off of them. Mm-hmm. Generally, unless your plants are really eating on your plants or nibbling on your plants, whatever is dried onto the leaf is less of a risk to them. I'm not saying that they couldn't be harmed by it if they were sitting there licking it off all day, but for the most part, I think that they'll generally leave it alone. If you put a wet plant on your windowsill, then they might be tempted to go over there and lick the drips off of it or something like that. And I don't know what it tastes like. I don't think it's necessarily made to deter for taste. It's a pesticide.
It doesn't matter. I mean, dogs and cats will eat stupid things no matter what. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some things that we're going to look for. Now, sometimes you're just going to have environmental factors that are causing your plant to not thrive.
Light,
less,
too much moisture.
Yeah, things like that. Too much humidity. We get a lot of people who send us pictures about vines that are dying back. And they're like, what's wrong with my plant? Is it dying? I'm worried about it. And everything else is healthy in the plant, but the tips of the vines are dying back. Yeah. That's not generally a problem with the health of the plant. That's usually a signal that the environment of the plant isn't what it wants. Yeah. It doesn't like to grow up into, if you have no light and the vine's going upward, it's going to be like, wait a minute, this is pointless. There's no light up here. I'm going to kill this vine off and I'll push a new growth point somewhere else.
Yeah, consider it like an oxen U-turn. Mm-hmm. Don't consider it like, oh, my plant died or something's unhealthy. It's basically just like your vine is exploring new territory and then deciding, I don't really care for it here. I'd rather go devote my attention of growth elsewhere. And so it diverts the oxen, which then causes a new growth point to activate somewhere else. You're looking at a very healthy plant deciding where it wants to be. That's the amazing part about it. It's not an unhealthy plant. It's just it decided it didn't want to grow in that direction anymore. So take that as an advisement that those dead ends are not unhealthy as long as your plant's continuing to grow and that growth is then diverted. It's still a healthy growth. It's just in a different direction. That's all.
Yeah. Brickhouse says, sometimes I struggle with the acclimation from prop to ambient. Could you touch on your process, please? It can be tough because I think that this is another one where you have to understand the science of what's happening to your plant so that helps you think about what to do. Yeah. So plant leaves have an outer coating on them, all of them, that helps them distribute their moisture out of the leaf, either by letting off humidity or by keeping in humidity, depending on what their circumstances are and what they need. If you're growing a plant and propagating it in a tote, a high humidity tote, which is a very common way for people to grow propagations in moss or something like that, there's so much humidity in that tote. Your plant does not want to create that outer layer on its leaf because it's like, I can't keep any more water inside me. I got to let as much out as I can because there's just too much water around me in the air. Not too much, but a lot of water around me in the air.
Transpiration overdrive.
Yeah. So
pedal to the floor.
If you take that plant and put it into ambient humidity right away, then it can't retain enough water. There's nothing there to help it keep the water in. It's like, oh my gosh, how did it get so dry? I'm letting go of all this water. There's nothing I can do because osmosis is the way water moves from roots to air all the way through the plant. It's always going to move from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. And if the lower concentration is your living room, it's going to push all the humidity right out of the plant. So what you got to do is help that plant build that outer layer of protective material on its leaves by giving it slow and steady exposure to ambient air. So Caleb will generally have a tote and he'll pull a plant out, pot it up because he doesn't grow them in cups in those totes. Then he'll put it in a tote, in a cup for a couple of days. Then he'll crack the lid for a few days. Then he'll put, leave the lid half on, but keep a lot of water in the tote.
It's a delicate balance, but what you're doing is just giving slightly longer exposure to ambient humid air, a little bit at a time at first, and a little bit longer, and then a little bit longer.
Today an hour, tomorrow 4 hours.
Yeah, eventually you get it to the point where that plant can take all day out there and it's not showing any adverse effects from being in that ambient humidity. Then I would say that plant has grown a nice cuticle, and it is what I would consider hardened off. And that's a greenhouse term that means it can survive outside of the greenhouse. All the plants that are inside the greenhouse, they have very thin cuticles and they are just on full overdrive, wide open stomatas, transpiring like they wouldn't believe, just trying to get rid of all that extra moisture that just doesn't go away. And they're just trying. Well, all of a sudden it's an ambient humidity and that extra moisture is gone. It's in the air and it evaporates easily in this ambient humidity, right? Well, that plant has got the petal pinned to the floor and it's just full transpiring. You have to teach that plant, ease off, hold on to some of that moisture. You're going to need it in a few minutes or a couple hours.
Yeah, and we have to think about what else uses moisture, right? The more light your plant gets, the more moisture it wants. It needs water to process light. That's how plants survive. So if you're pulling a plant out of high humidity and you're going to put it in a ambient humidity, you're kind of doing that acclimation process and you're worried that it's going to dry out too fast, lower your light a little bit. then it doesn't need so much light while it's acclimating.
Yeah, that helps to extend the process while you're doing that acclimation. Eventually, the goal is to give them a bright light in ambient humidity and watch them not suffer any adverse effects from it. Then you'll know you've grown a good thick cuticle, that plant's tough, it's ready to go, and it's ready to meet the world. Like I said, I've received many plants that there was nothing I could do to save them because within 2 days they were completely deteriorated. There was nothing I could help. I suspect that those plants came out of a tote. I bought them in ideal looking condition, but as soon as they hit the mail, they're not looking as ideal anymore.
Yeah, and that's not a terrible way to grow or sell. I want to be very clear. A lot of people sell that way, and that's totally fine. You just want to know about it. So if you're buying from a seller and you don't know how they grow, ask them, like, how has this plant been growing? What should I expect when it gets here? Yeah. That way you know.
A good seller is going to be able to tell you those things. They'll be able to communicate answer those questions for you. I think that's the difference in this market is there's a lot of people that just want to make sales overseas and they don't really want to back their sale. But people who are reputable in this market will happily answer your questions and help you get on track. The minimal questions. I'm not saying that, hey, teach me how to grow this plant, but I am saying, tell me how you've been growing this plant. Those are questions a grower should be able to answer you. And if they won't, maybe that's not the seller you want to deal with. That's all I'm saying is that is a criteria I feel helps you to understand who you're dealing with as a seller, and you establish a relationship with people who give you the kind of reaction that you would like to have.
Ziploc bags are great for smaller plants. The comforter bags, the ones that you would buy a blanket in that zip up, those are really great for larger plants.
Yeah. Again, the main thing is just keep a close eye on things. Monitor your leaves. If they start to droop or dip, that's the first sign that you're losing some moisture or humidity. And so you want to go ahead and monitor that. And if it's starting to give you more reaction than you're comfortable with, put it back into that high humidity environment and give it a chance to give the leaves some more humidity for a bit, and they'll perk back up again. And you can keep working on it to get it to that point. Now, like I said, I've often had to repot things in order to make them work in our ambient humidity because the soil that they're in dries out much too quickly. If they're just in moss, sometimes that can be tricky. And it's just, you have to evaluate your conditions versus what the plant is doing.
It depends if your soil is dry or not, Lanasha. If you notice that the leaves are drooping and the soil is bone dry, then I would water the plant. But if you notice that your soil is not bone dry, then I would say that maybe you need to increase the humidity for that plant and not necessarily water again.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have that misconception that they, grow in a cabinet and that must mean they have high humidity. And that's not necessarily the case. If there's no water in there, then there's no humidity,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the reason why we grow ours in ambient, because we have realized through the process of growing that if we grow plants here in ambient humidity and ship them to just about anybody, they should acclimate pretty easily. Now, obviously, there are other places in the country that have much less humidity than even we do here in Michigan. I mean, for us, 25% is pretty dry, but in other places it could be far drier, and you may need to add something to your soil to help retain water. In other places, they have much higher humidity. If our plants went to Florida and tried to live outside, they would definitely be overwatered.
Yeah.
So
it's an adjustment you make for your region and how your conditions are. Your soil will reflect that, your ideal situation. And again, I find that if we repot all of our plants in consistent media, then their differences we are able to address. But the media is a constant for us. And I feel like that's important as a grower and as a collector, that if you're trying to maintain a lot of plants at a time, it is helpful to have those certain constants that run through your collection and run through your media. Not all of our plants are in our soil, but the majority of them are. And I think that makes it easier to pay special attention to the ones that are not and need extra different care or whatever.
We really do think that everyone should have their own custom soil media.
Yeah.
I mean, you should take a starting point from somebody that works well for you and adjust it to yours. Some people are going to be self-watering. Some people are going to be in pond, some things like that. But what works for us is this, and knowing how to use the tools at your disposal to change that makes a big difference. If you're noticing, like Lanasha said, that, she adds some peat moss to her pots to help retain water, great idea. It definitely will work.
Yeah.
Too much peat moss can get really heavy. and really kind of start to suffocate the roots. So we tend to add vermiculite because that's a great way to keep things light and airy, but put more water into your soil.
Yeah, but we don't grow in strictly vermiculite because the peat has a little bit longer moisture retention. And so the balance of those ingredients is helpful. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to grow plants. I think that, knowing where your plants are coming from and then how you want to grow them and starting to work those two lines together over a gradual period of time, I think is where the success comes. Is if you just take your plant and try and force it to live in ambient humidity after coming out of a tote, you're going to have a really tricky time of that. If you try and force the other way, you can have a really tricky time. When you're rooted in soil and then you stick it in a Mills Bow cabinet, for example, or you stick it into a tote, you can have real issues with soil molding and fungus and things like that going on. So you do have to be mindful. Some conditions are not ideal for other media.
A sandy mix will work well for certain types of plants, in certain environments. If I'm growing succulents or agave, my soil media is not going to hold any water whatsoever. I want to soak water through that plant and have it fall at the bottom of the pot immediately. So something that is very sandy in a very high humidity situation would help with that. I'm not going to put our Hoyas in sandy mix.
The problem I think with sandy, with Hoyas or with aeroids or even with alocasias is the breathability factor.
Yeah, it can get compacted pretty easily.
Quite densely, and then it stays moist just an inch below or half an inch below the surface for days. But it's not getting the oxygen flow in there. And that can be tricky for roots. And that's why you'll often see when you're at the beach or around a lake or something, a lot of the plants that are rooted, they're rooted quite shallow because if they root deeper than that, they stay wet longer than the roots can survive. And it's not the most healthy environment for them. So they tend to root right in the surface and they get all the moisture they need right there in that top 3/4 of an inch of soil in the sandy mix. So something to be considered. I would never put a deep sandy bed underneath a plant. Even with a succulent, I think that sometimes that can be a bit too much, and you have a difficult time balancing.
Cactuses that live out in the desert, they root, really deep into the soil.
Yeah.
So they get that water from the earth,
When the roots are mature,
and any soil media can be made to work in your condition. That's something we try to get people to understand. Is if you understand how that soil handles water and you understand how your environment uses water, you can make any soil media do whatever you want. But it may require more of you than you want to do. It may require you watering every single day, or it may require you not watering for 3 weeks.
Right.
So it's more understanding it than that any one way is wrong.
Yeah. We've grown Hoyas in moss hanging on plaques in the wall. We've grown them in giant, huge buckets or giant, huge terracotta pots. So in a wide variety, we've grown them, but they definitely have differences for each setup. And you want to be able to monitor those things and also know what your plant's been exposed to so that you can receive it and bring it into your new way of growing, not just shock them into here's what I have here. So either you're going to survive or not, but often that's a really hard learning curve for a plant. And if they haven't developed a nice cuticle, it can take weeks to develop that, and it can only take days for it to dry out in your ambient circumstances. So that's why we evaluate as they're going. Is there something that's going well? Is there something that's going poorly here? Or do we need to make some adjustments in order to get things doing well?
We don't feel it's necessary rooting hormone for Hoyas.
Yeah.
They're so good at putting out growth points anywhere on their vine that they want to. It doesn't seem necessary. Aeroids, maybe.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the specimen. Often with aeroids, I tend to air layer anyways.
Yeah.
And that kind of negates the necessity for rooting hormone. However,
frequently used in orchids.
If you're taking a fresh cut off of a plant that's not been air layered and it's an aeroid, maybe you want to do that to stimulate some new growth points, internodal growth points perhaps. But it's just one of those things I think it's necessary in a lot of plants. But with Hoyas or with aeroids even, it's extra.
Works well in like roses or cannabis or whatnot, but ornamental houseplants, I'm not sure it's always necessary.
Yeah, there are certain plants that don't actually produce hormone to grow root in internodal spaces. And so for those particular species, you definitely want to be able to add some so that it can trigger that growth. But with Hoyas, I find that they grow a lot of opportunistic nodes between the growths. And so they're already growing roots. They just need moisture. And if they can get that moisture, they'll just start taking off. Even if it's high humidity, often you'll have stringy roots hanging off your plants.
Okay. I'm all dried up. That's a great name. Said I would pay you guys to come to my house and help with growing conditions. You're very sweet. You don't have to pay us. If you have questions, you're always welcome to shoot them over to us here. We have a Facebook group, Schlief Tropicals Hoya Community, where you can jump over and post all the information about your environment, and us or other people from the group will jump in and let you know some advice I think is really helpful. You can see a lot of our information on our website, schliefttropicals.com. But yeah, you don't got to pay us for that. Yeah. I got a carnosa locally. Most of the leaves are really soft. I checked the roots and they looked okay. Anything else I should do to help this plant? When you say soft, do they look new? Are they like very light green?
Yeah, because sometimes the new growth is soft like that.
Or all the old leaves soft as well.
Ooh, show off the collection.
Yeah, we also love doing co-streams. So if you think that you want to just have us walk around with you, and if you're open to sharing your environment with everybody else, we're happy to have you do a tour or co-stream with us, and we'll give you our opinion. They're all wrinkly.
If half the plant is wrinkly, I would say check for soil impaction. Mm-hmm. If the full plant is wrinkly, I would say check your soil for pest pressures most likely.
Knock off the soil.
Potentially it could be impaction as well, but often you'll get some leaves that are wrinkly and some that are not when you have a soil compaction issue. But those are all things that I would evaluate. If your leaves are wrinkly, that means your plant is dehydrated or emaciated in some way. So that means that the roots are not taking up the nutrients in the water like they should be. There's quite a possibility it could be pests, but I would say first things first, why aren't the roots taking up water? Are there pests down there, or is it just that the roots are in dry soil? And for example, whoops, losing our setup here. For example, if you happen to have a pot that dries out, okay, here's the pot of soil, it dries out and it shrinks back away from the pot liner or the inside of the pot, right? Now there's a gap in between the root ball or the mass of soil that has dried together in sort of a clump, okay? It was mud, now it's a clump of hard soil, compacted soil, but there's a gap all the way around. And when you pour water in the top, the water can easily go around that mass, fall out the bottom, and it looks like that pot is watered all the way through, but it's not. The whole center of that pot is bone dry. Now that would give your plant,
or it's still soaking
the
wet,
appearance of a raisin. Your leaves would still be very thin and very wrinkly, and they wouldn't come back from that type of a watering.
Yeah, once they're dry rotted, they're not going to come back.
Yeah.
So I would cut them off. And if you have dry rot or extra dry roots, do you cut them off?
Yeah.
And start from scratch? Yes.
Yeah, because those roots won't come back. They don't regrow any new roots from those. You'll get the new growth from either the stem or from healthy root segments. So if you can trim away any damaged root, it just makes room, and it has less organic material that could be decomposing in the pot that might cause healthy roots to struggle to be healthy in that environment. So
if you have decomposing roots in your pot, you're going to start to shift your pH in the soil a little bit, which can be change how your plant is able to take up nutrients.
Right. So that's what we were talking about earlier when you say, okay, I got a plant that looks like it's struggling. Now, if this plant happens to be medium to large size, you're going to want to take a few cuttings off of that plant to downsize it so that those damaged or affected roots will be able to support the plant growth above. So that's something that a lot of people don't realize, and they try and reroot a plant that's too large, and then it struggles to get going. And unfortunately, often you'll end up losing the whole plant that way. Or trying to reroot the whole plant and not wanting to lose it, you'll lose the whole thing. So I'm an advocate of cut it back, make multiple tries at it. Maybe you're talking about cutting it into 5 different nodes, 5 different cuttings that you're rooting. Well, if you lose 2, 3 makes a really nice pot. So if you lose the mother plant and those other 2 cuttings, you still have a nice plant to rely on. You still have the species in your collection. So that's why I advocate for that. those cuttings often do much better than the mother plant does in that case. And so definitely get those into propagation. Don't just cut it back and throw them away, but you're trying to save the original roots that you purchased on the plant. And if those roots are not strong enough, sometimes they come back and they start growing in, and sometimes through all efforts, they still don't make it. So it's something to take into consideration. And again, more reasons to take those insurance cuts right from the start. I do sometimes cut.
I think it's more important to intervene early than to wait too long.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's one of those things that if it looks like you've done some overwatering, or you looks like you're just struggling to keep the plant happy, you're a lot better off trying to repropagate that and try and grow new roots.
If you have a plant that's leaves are completely dehydrated and the roots have completely rotted and there's no good root left on there, either dry rot or just rotted, and you have to cut it once it's dehydrated, it's really hard to rehydrate a leaf via the stem alone. Sometimes, not all species, but sometimes it can be very challenging.
And so, that Aramelin is one of those species that can have sensitive roots. So you gotta be careful with your watering on that one. And you can easily overwater. And if you have, that's the time for action. It's not just going to regrow roots underneath the plant. If you have a decent sized plant, you are going to have to take some action and make some cuts. And it seems pretty drastic, but it's not drastic if you can save your plant that way.
Yeah, cocoa has to dry really fast in our environment too. Yeah. So if you don't want to repot it, then I would look at, obviously watering more frequently, or putting that pot in something that's going to help retain. So like maybe a ceramic pot to help to retain moisture in there a little bit more.
What's tricky about those coconut chunks sometimes is it appears dry on the surface, but it's not always dry below. Mm-hmm. So I have overwatered plants that appeared dry on the surface, but they actually were holding quite a bit of moisture down below. Another reason why I think it's important to be aware of what's going on below your roots, and also how your watering affects them. So just another point of consideration is all.
So root rot from overwatering isn't really caused by the water. More often it's caused by the soil around it being so wet that it's putting moisture onto the stem and onto the roots that they can't breathe. They can't, or bacteria overgrowth starts to happen. It's not usually the roots that are dying there. Or the water that's causing the problem. It's everything else in there.
Yeah, if everything stays wet for so long, that's where the problems start to begin.
Root rot is actually caused by a bacteria.
Yeah, and it grows and multiplies abundantly in that over humid environment. If you can allow for that environment to dry out in between waterings, then it has a lot more difficult time continuing with the rot.
No, this is a urban legend that we do not like. You should water your plant for the size of its roots, not for the size of its pot.
Yeah.
If we tell you to water a 10-inch pot with this much root and this much pot till it comes out the bottom, you're going to soak that plant way too much.
Yeah.
So this is why we think it's important to know how much roots you have in there, so you know how much water to give your plant. You want to wet the roots. You don't want to wet all of the soil.
Yeah.
Very rarely. It depends, again, on your media and on the plant. There are certain species like cyclamens or African violets. They don't like to be watered on their leaves. You'll get a lot of leaf damage. So we usually water those from the bottom, and that will have the whole soil media get wet.
Yeah. But it's different growing media. It's a different plant, different root structures, and they enjoy that treatment. They do like that type of environment where they can just sit in a tray of water. They will live like that. Whereas your Hoyas, they need that gap in between in order for the bacteria that might be trying to rot the roots to die off, but also just so that the roots can breathe and be healthy and get good oxygen exchange. That's, part of their process.
Yeah. Pauline is right. They're very resilient. Plants will try it. Like, they will try really hard to live. That's their whole purpose.
Yeah.
So sometimes you get lucky and they just root anyway. You're like, whew, thanks. Absolutely. That wasn't because of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's just luck. Yeah. But I think that's the beauty of what we're doing here is we're all trying our best, and sometimes we're lucky. Sometimes we're not that lucky. But if we're lucky, we have a great collection and a bunch of really beautiful plants to show all of our friends. And again, if your friends are luckier than you, then maybe we can share tips, and maybe we can share, ideas and techniques and strategies. And I think that that's where we come ahead, is we all can share our information. Formats like this give us an opportunity to ask questions and have discussions and share some of the things we've learned. I think it's huge for each of us to be able to observe what other people are doing and to be able to learn from it.
What kind of soil do you use when you're doing that kind of watering it all the way through a situation? What is your media? And are you growing mostly Hoyas? Are you growing aeroids?
Chunky mix. Yeah. See, the chunky mix flows quick.
Yeah, because the water's not staying in that pot.
Almost as soon as you're pouring it on the top, it's coming out the bottom.
Yeah.
Under those circumstances, it can be difficult to tell whether or not you have dry pockets in your pot, because if the water is finding the path of least resistance, it might have a spot where the roots are kind of tight and it's not allowing for that one place to get moisture.
You can't see it, but over here in the window, we have a thematophile sitting in the window, and it grows in a very chunky, this is just the top of the pot, very chunky bark. There's almost nothing. There's some perlite, but there's almost no peat in this mix. If you water through this plant fast, the water is going to retain somewhat in the bark, but it's going to fall mostly through. So that's okay to water that pot pretty heavily, because most of the water is falling out.
Yeah.
If most of the water is staying in the pot, then you don't want to have a pot or a media that's going to hold a lot of water. For an aeroid.
The reason that's set up like that is because it is a 10-gallon bucket, and it's designed to be, or it's set up to be, in the rain in the summertime. So it's in its summer digs. I never changed it into the pot for the wintertime mix, but the summer chunky mix, it allows for heavy rains to fall, and it doesn't rot that plant because it's got such a mostly bark mix there that it's actually just.
Thank you.
It's fine with that. It's okay with that. I do the same thing with my giant monstera. It's not set up so that with our soil, that would be way too much moisture in that bucket, and it would kill that plant immediately upon the first rain. So again, knowing your circumstances, I water this in a giant tray, and I water it like it's a torrential downpour. I put a gallon of water through the bucket, but that's because it's such a huge pot, and it falls through, and it just gets the right balance there.
Ooh, okay. For me last week.
How do you water that? Again, you just give it a shot of water and let it absorb through like a sponge. Water it right at the base of the stem, and it will sort of disperse as it falls through the cup. It does its thing, and again, I think that good soil takes the moisture where you put it, and it just sort of spreads from there. If you're pouring right at the stem, it's going to get to where the roots are. Now, when the roots are obviously all the way to the edge of the cup, then you can give it a little bit more water. What I would do then is I would water it a little, let it soak in, and come back to it a few minutes later with another light watering. Again, neither time am I watering until it falls out the bottom intentionally, but occasionally some of those drops will come out of the bottom. In a cup like this, I'm less worried about it.
When you can see too, that makes a big difference. We can see how this soil will change color based on how wet or dry it is. So oftentimes you water, I'll water till the water level at the top of the soil is right here, walk away, come back, and it's wet to here. I'll water lightly, walk away for a few hours, and the water will disperse itself through the whole cup. Yeah. And by the end of the day, the whole cup is dark.
Yeah. So it starts out, the top gets quite dark, and this is still light. But you come back and it's evenly dark throughout. So it spreads and disperses molecule to molecule.
A lot of that is the vermiculite that we use in our mix. That helps make it humid and wet, but not heavy.
Right. And keeps the loftiness and allows for oxygen to get to the roots. It doesn't become dense and compacted most times. Now, in our mother plants, they're larger, heavier plastic. And I do have to occasionally get in there and stir it up with a chopstick just to get that soil aeration that I want.
Yes, it is like slowly wicking through the plant.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say, air, especially for a lacanosa, when it's got the fine roots, air on the side of drier than wetter.
Right. Yeah, and you'll start to see the leaves will thin slightly. That's about the time you want to start watering. You don't want to water when the leaves are super plump, but also you don't want to let them get super thin and depleted.
Yeah.
Either.
we don't use tree fern, so I can't give you a direct correlation on how much tree fern instead of something else to use. I know Phil uses it at Gathering Moss in his mix, so he might have some information for you on that.
Yeah, and tree fern mixed with peat, mixed with vermiculite and perlite, I think that's a great combination as well. I don't think there's anything wrong with just adding that as an amendment to the soil. It helps to aerate. It helps to create pockets of, have empty space in there that allow for air to flow. And it's also low decomposition rate on fern fiber. So there's a lot of good reasons to use it. Here are the negatives. It's hard to find sometimes, and it's quite expensive. So those are the reasons why we don't use it. It's great planting material. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just value for result is why we tend to not buy it. I do use it for my terrariums for the frogs and stuff. It's great media that's, like I said, slow decomposition is really critical in there when you're talking about setting up for a 25-year species. You want that to kind of last. You don't want to have to rework that environment all the time. So it lasts well in there, and it does the job. But I typically steer away from it for plants. I think it's kind of expensive for planting media, and there's other things that are a little more readily available here. And that's why we tend to go towards that. The fern bark that we buy from Chewy is excellent as well, and it's low decomposition as well. And it does the same basic thing. It's providing some structure to the soil that allows for air pockets, small little air pockets where air can flow. When you pour a slug of water in your pot and the water falls through, it has a way of pulling air behind it. And so it actually pulls the oxygen down into the soil farther than you think it goes. It's not just the breeze that blows it in there, but it's actually the vacuum of the water flowing through that pulls air in behind, and it starts to feed those roots with a little bit of air.
Yeah, that's a perfect thing to do. Keep playing with it. You'll find your mix.
Experiment, and you'll find your perfect mix. When you find that, it's hard not to switch everything you have into that blend that you've come up with, because that continuity is what helps us to maintain our whole collection, I think. But we hope that was some useful information for you guys. Hope you guys, I hope you had something to teach. But
look at your plants regularly. Intervene sooner rather than later. Investigate all parts of your plant, the top, the roots, everything, to see if you see any specific reason why you're having to struggle. Things like, pest pressures, root damage, things like that. And then don't be afraid to intervene, try to intervene. If you don't know what to do, go out to the community and ask. There are always great people around that will help you and give you advice. Take many opinions and then decide what works for you.
Right.
Yeah.
What are the materials you can readily find? What are the techniques you want to implement? Again, I think gathering the information and then evaluating what's best for you or what works best in your circumstances, that's what gives us our variety. And maybe, just maybe, you come up with the best solution and you can share it with all of us. So,
and ultimately, don't hold yourself accountable for a plant dying.
Yeah.
Plants die. They're not supposed to live forever.
Right.
They're not intended to live for 40 years. Some do, but most of them aren't supposed to live that long. So it's okay if your plant dies. You can get another one.
Right. If you implement some of these techniques and strategies, you might be able to save it. But even if you can't, often these plants are easily replaceable. Don't beat yourself up over losing a plant. It's no reflection of your plant prowess or your love for the plant because you lost a plant.
It doesn't mean it's not a reflection that you are a good or bad grower.
Right.
Because that's just part of growing plants. You're going to get pests. You're going to have root rot. You're going to and part of the hobby, I just focus on the fun part. The fun part is now I get to get a new plant if this one dies,
Right. Exactly.
So, exactly. Yeah. They are not this pampered in the wild. So they can be pretty resilient. And if we teach them to be resilient, then it's even easier.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad it's a good perspective. So
absolutely.
Moral of the story, buy more plants.
Yeah, they're great to have around. And even if they're fussy, sometimes that's good to have around.
Yeah.
A challenge is kind of a good thing, in my opinion. As long as you don't take on too many challenges and you don't put yourself under a burden of, I have to make these plants live. No, it doesn't. It's not a determiner of your value or your success, whether or not you can keep your plants alive. It's just a matter of, these are fun to have around. It's a nice thing to learn how to grow these things. And it gives you a little bit of some patience and perspective. And I think it's a very cool thing to be into. I've had a lot of different hobbies in my time, and I love plants. I always have, and it's been one of those long-lasting things that's lasted through my lifetime. My dad passed on a love of plants that he learned from his dad, and so on and so forth. And it's just been one of those things that's been in my blood since I was sentient. I knew that plants are amazing, and they're awesome. We always had a garden as a kid, and I always had a respect for nature and just, reverence and
I didn't. I learned this much later.
Yeah.
After, marriage to him.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. And for a lot of years, I was like, why are you doing this? This is pointless. When you were into bonsai and outdoor plants, I was not nearly as engaged. But
yeah. Well, anyway, I think there's a matter of once you take the plunge and you start getting into it, you start having your own plants. It makes a difference.
It does, yeah. And I'm not saying that just that you don't want your plants to live or that it isn't better when they do. Absolutely, you feel more successful and you really get to enjoy a plant that you're like, oh, I want. But like I had a silver maranta that I absolutely loved, and I was neglectful of it, and it died because I wasn't paying attention. But I'd like to look at that as it just didn't have what it took to survive in my environment. So what did I do? Just bought another one. I just bought another one. It's doing just fine.
Yeah. So that's the moral of
the story. I try to pay closer attention to it now because I don't want this one to die either. But if it dies, I'll just get another one. Some of them are rare and hard to do that with. I get that, but
yeah, this doesn't necessarily apply to those one of a kind, super rare unicorn plants that you're spending those kind of monies for. And again, I've done that. We bought those type of plants, and it can be a very disappointing avenue.
It's a lot of pressure
to stroll down.
Yeah.
So.
All right. That was quite a tangent of a variety of topics today. Yes. I hope that it answered a lot of your questions, but if it didn't, you're always welcome, like I said, to reach out to us and we'll chat more or bring them up in the next live.
Yeah.
Did anyone need to see any plants before we left? There's still things in the shop. If you wanted to see anything, I certainly can show you. If not, you can always find them in our store. Yeah. We'll be back on Friday next week for our normal show. Tune in to all of our social media to see where you'll find us elsewhere, like say on Tuesday of this week.
Yeah.
Perhaps giving a class.
We'll have all those things available in the store as well till the end of the day. If you order by the end of the day, we will still ship Monday morning.
Yeah, everything ships tomorrow if you ordered, unless you chose a hold as well.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back on Sunday for our normal sale and chat. I don't have the topic yet for next week, but I'm sure we'll think of something by then.
Stay tuned to our Instagram and Facebook pages for any other announcements of other places you might see us.
Thank you, guys.
This week,
perhaps. We really, really appreciate all of your support, both in showing up here every week and in buying our plants so that we can buy plants too. We really do appreciate it.
We wouldn't be able to do it.
If you're celebrating, we wish you a happy Easter.
Yes, absolutely.
If you're not celebrating, we wish you a happy Sunday. How do you about transfer? Oh, yeah, we need to do that.
That's a good
It's about time. So maybe we'll talk about that next week.
Good topic of conversation there. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Happy Sunday.
Thank you for joining us.
Have a great week.
Happy Easter to you all.
We'll see you in a few.